You are here with the NTCA Roundtable Live program, and today we have a very esteemed panel discussing the process of reviewing the ANSI documents. I'm Mark Heinlein, NTCA's training director, and with me today we have with us Chris Walker, Becky Serban, Scott Conwell, Ryan Marino, and Scott Carothers. So beginning with Chris Walker, can each of our panel members introduce yourselves?
Chris Walker with the David Allen Company. I've been the chairman of the ANSI committee for about a dozen years, and I'm the current chairman of the National Tile Contractors Association.
I am Becky Serban. I'm the Education and Curriculum Director for NTCA.
I'm Scott Conwell. I'm with International Masonry Institute. I'm an architect.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ryan Marino. I'm with the Tile Council of North America, and I'm the Standards Development and Research Manager here at Tile Council.
And last but not least, I'm Scott Carothers. I am the Director of Certification and Training for the Ceramic Tile Education Foundation in sunny South Carolina.
Panel, thank you very much. I want to begin our program with the chairman of the ANSI committee, Mr. Chris Walker. Chris?
Thanks, Mark. You asked us to do this several months ago, and through those last few months, we've been working very hard with a small group of people in various subsections on a process that started probably 3.5 years ago originally. You were part of that process initially, where we started to parse through the ANSI document that we've all been working with for decades. And all of us who've been into the document realize as you go through it paragraph by paragraph, there are some things that may have seemed either unclear, a bit confusing, perhaps a bit dated. So this has been an effort in the industry to try to update that. There are many methods and references to document or to processes and products that were really prevalent 50, 60 years ago that are less prevalent today. And perhaps more importantly, there are so many new products that we deal with in the marketplace every day, and the technology for the manufacturing of tile material has progressed in relative light years compared to the last 3,000 years. So that was the impetus for getting this process started. It's finally coming to fruition where we'll have at least a part of a document to ballot at our next ANSI meeting, which traditionally is in coverings in April, but this year will be in coverings in July. We're excited to have several items to distribute shortly to the committee, and that's kind of a milestone. So this conversation today is a little bit about how the sausage is made, and hopefully we'll get some questions from folks that haven't been part of the process or that may have questions about the document, because you know what, you could change a sentence or a paragraph right here in this conversation today.
Very valuable conversation. Thank you, Chris. And yes, this review process has been a long time in coming and a long process here. Where are you at in this review process? What exactly are you looking at?
Well, there's lots of parts and pieces. There are different groups working on different parts of it. On a very broad overview, we decided to bite off principally one ANSI A108.01 and 0.02, because this is preparation by other trades and responsibilities of the tile contractor. The remaining sections in the installation section will be addressed at some point. 108.05 has already been addressed, just the thin set installations. And then we're going to rely at some point in the future on the manufacturers working through the 118 sections. So Scott Conwell, as an example, is working on the 108T, which is terms, which is going to be essentially a restating of definitions already in the document and a clarification of some of the items that have created some confusion in the document. Brad Denny is kind of looking at 108.M, which is materials, which is got to get taken into a separate section. But then this started several months ago with Scott Carothers and Becky and I trying to vet through some initial, what if this and how about that, and should we look at that, and does this make sense here? We got through much of 10801, and then the broader committee started going through it essentially, I'll say paragraph by paragraph, line by line, word by word.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit, for the benefit of persons who might be watching this in the future? This program is being recorded and will be posted on NTCA's YouTube channel. Why are the ANSI standards important for any number of tile industry professionals, from installers to architects to contractors and everyone in between? Why are these important? What is 0.01? Could you tell us briefly again? And what exactly is found in 0.02? And why should industry professionals use these things? And a follow-up to that, as you're rewriting these, I understand that you're making them a little bit more user-friendly. Am I right in understanding that?
Well, just let me first qualify that everything that we're doing is simply a proposal. This entire process has to go through a very, very detailed and required ANSI proposal, which requires some consensus building, a lot of collaboration, and ultimately, you know, a ballot by the ANSI committee. So even today amongst our group, there's some discussion as to how deeply we should edit the document per se. And I'm going to make that as a representation in this way. So Scott Carothers and I had a conversation several months ago about how often he referred to the ANSI document. He'd bring it to him with him on job sites. He'd have conversations with the builders. He'd have conversations with the owners in terms of telling them how, you know, he used that document and what qualified him as a, you know, professional tile contractor or a professional contractor. And that document, and the document still today, has lots of detail. It really drills down into a whole bunch of areas that that yes, are very useful, but you know, I'm going to say that this starts from a time when there were two methods, mud and thicker mud, right? That's what we had. We had mud and we had thicker mud. Today, you can't open your email without some new product being, you know, shown as the greatest new thing to save the tile installation community, or the greatest new product being distributed. And that's fantastic. But some of the methods that were in here 50 years ago don't necessarily keep up with that. So we started to layer a whole bunch of stuff in. Now, my opinion, which is not shared by all, and this is still going to get vetted out through the process, is the ANSI document needs to be the foundation. It needs to be the purest, most basic form of what's required for a successful tile installation. I believe that, you know, since in my cell phone, I essentially have access to the Library of Congress. I also have access to all of the manufacturer's recommended installation procedures, and much more information than I could possibly digest, certainly much more information than can be represented in any single standard. So the level of detail that has yet to find its way into the finished product, I think, remains to be seen. Again, and that's why there's a committee. The committee has to agree upon what that's going to look like. But just in terms of the other follow-up part to your question, A10801 currently, or is retitled as General Requirements, Structures, Substrates, Preparation, and Work by Other Trades. This is supposed to I'm going to say, at least a phrase that I've used, I was trying to equalize the buckets of responsibility between the manufacturers, the designer, and the installation community. Because we all have an investment in producing successful tile installations, but in some cases, the document didn't do a fantastic job at protecting all of those entities. So hopefully we have an eye to producing a document that's good for the installation community, but perhaps more importantly, well, and is, you know, that's the purpose of this, is to be good for the tile industry. So that's the first goal, a document that's good for the tile industry, that shares the responsibility amongst the buckets, that clarifies in the most basic terms what a successful assembly looks like. And then beyond that, I'd like I'd like Becky and Scott Carothers to talk a little bit too about the process, because they're, they've been instrumental. And then later in the process, we've got a whole bunch of people, including some on this call, that have spent hours and hours and hours walking through the paragraphs.
Outstanding. Chris, before we cut over to the Becky and Scott and the rest of the panel to chime in on that, I wonder if you can answer one more question that our Bart Bettiga, our executive director, has asked. And it's a great question. I'm just going to read it to you from the chat screen. How important is it, or why is it important, to have ANSI and TCNA handbook content match each other? And he goes on to say, what belongs in ANSI and what belongs or does not belong in the TCNA handbook. Why do we need both documents in our reference library? Why don't we just bring all of those into one document? We have NTCA reference manual, the TCNA handbook, the various ANSI standards. Why so many different documents?
Well, that's like a setup, because there's no good answer to that. So, but I think that that's an important distinction. What is the ANSI document supposed to do, and what is the TCNA document and the NTCA reference manual supposed to do, and MMSA and ASTM, lots of different players. Well, at the end of the day, all of them are intended to instruct the design community, the installation community, and the using community what a successful installation should look like and what the requirements are. But I think that this reinforces the point that I try to make, is that no single document could do that. There's not one document that could do that. And ANSI, in my view, is the foundational document that is the foundation on which successful tile assemblies are built. There are so many components now available in the industry to the user, to the tile professional. You couldn't possibly put them in one form. There are lots of things in TCNA that don't belong in ANSI. And the things, as an example, there may be things in TCNA that don't have definable performance standards. In my opinion, it doesn't have a definable performance standard. It doesn't belong in ANSI. ANSI items have been proven through the reference standards in the A118 material section and the 137 manufacturing section to have repeatable, reliable performance standards for all of the items in there. But that's not to say that things aren't commonly done in the industry that aren't successful. It just may mean that nobody's taken the time or spent the effort to go ahead and get those tested or substantiated to the degree that it would require to get an ANSI label. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. That is an outstanding answer. Yeah, very clearly. Thank you.
Can I piggyback on that, Chris? This is Scott Conwell. Can I?
Sure, of course.
Okay, it's a good question by Bart. And one of our biggest challenges as the group has gone through the ANSI standards, A108.01 and A108.02, is trying to decide what information is appropriate for which documents. And part of Bart's question said, how should the information be spread out? And true, some belongs in one document and some belongs in another, and some in one section of ANSI and some in a different section of ANSI. But by the same token, we also have to understand that these are all reference documents for the tile industry. And one of the shortcomings we recognized about the documents, and I'm not trying to knock the documents, but because they're good documents, but they could be better. And one of the shortcomings that we recognized early on is that some of the terminology was inconsistent. Right? So a word might mean one thing in the Tile Council handbook, and it might mean a different thing in one of the ANSI sections, and it might be defined a third way in another section. And then we noticed that there are many terms that are not defined at all, and we think we know what a structure is, or what a substrate is, or something like that. Who a specifier is. And, we think we have an idea of what these words mean, but they're not defined anywhere, other than a few of this A137.1 has some definitions, and a few of the the product standards and the specific installation standards do. So to not to go on and on, but just to wrap up my point, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that there is a parity among all of the standards out there, including the Tile Council Handbook, so that we're all working from the same very basic level of information, and at the very least the terminology is consistent across the standards.
That is extremely critical. And I'm wondering if Becky Serban might be able to comment on the process that it has been taken amongst the panel and amongst the ANSI group that's working on this to keep all of that terminology, everything organized as this review process is underway. Has it been a simple task, Becky? Does everybody always agree right away?
Absolutely. That's why it's taken us just a year to start working on this. No, it's and Scott has actually been the one that's been really the workhorse behind all the definitions. When we're on a call, it's, oh, what's a backer? What's substrate? Why are they both listed here? And so Scott would take it back to his team and really try to define what the term is, which term should be used. And then it would come back to the full committee going, okay, so this is what we think the term should be. This is why we think it should be that. And it's been very heated discussions at time, very good discussions at time. And it's been a process, I will say that, but you know, some sections of the full documents we've been able to fly through. Everybody's in agreement right away. And then there's other sections that we may get through maybe a section in a 2-hour time frame, just depending on what that topic is and how passionate some people feel about it.
Okay, that's a lot to manage right there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You've been in this process now, I think Chris said 9, 10, 11 months, maybe pushing a year or more. How long do you think it will take? How much longer? Do you see an event horizon here, Chris or Becky or anyone?
I personally don't yet. And the only reason I say that is just because we have a draft done of 01 and we'll have a draft completed of 02 probably in the next month. Doesn't mean that they're going to be voted on next week. It's still going to be a process of making sure that all the information is there because there's big changes to both documents. And so making sure that we've captured everything that needs to be there, things were moved properly. And say, for example, if something was in one of these 2 documents and everybody felt like it should be moved into another standard, making sure those are also all aligned. So while the hard work of the full committee may be coming to an end, or the subcommittee may be coming to an end soon, it's still going to be some work to get the whole thing done.
Yeah, let me jump in on that if I might. Because somebody who's not familiar with this process and how you can argue literally for 30 minutes on 2 or 3 words or perhaps an hour on a sentence, because these have real specific and very real consequences potentially in the event of a failure, right? You know, when things are great and nobody cares. But in the event of a failure, how a sentence is constructed is the difference between going out of business potentially or having some allies in response to a claim. So it seems like it should be an easy thing. So, well, you know, gosh, it's only a few hundred pages. How long does it take? But, you know, this is a small group of industry people who all have other jobs. So this is a part-time endeavor, and we do our best to schedule these calls once every other week for most of the sections. And, you know, even through those periods of time, folks don't always have a chance to get to it. And last year with COVID, I don't know about any other contractors on this call, but we were chasing the wheel about as fast as we could to try to keep things normal. And, you know, as an example, Scott Conwell asked me to respond to some stuff by Monday the 19th. I started to go through it right away, but I haven't had a chance to complete it. So it's just a matter of we can't all get to it all the time. So that's why there's a bit of lack of continuity and also why it has taken in part so much time.
I think I'd like to jump in a little bit here. I don't think Chris and Becky are giving themselves enough credit. And to be fair, a year in the standards realm is not a very long time. There are standards and specifications, either new or just revisions, that take multiple years in order to develop, for the very reasons that Chris mentioned. You know, a lot of the people that participate in this voluntary effort have other jobs. They work a regular job every day, and they're participating in this process and giving of themselves to this industry. So that takes time. And, you know, as Chris mentioned too, you know, you often find yourself, I wouldn't say argue. I think I would lean more towards discuss. You know, you find yourself in discussions over what many might see as something trivial, but when looking deeply at it, you can understand the liability that might come with just a few words. And, you know, we're trying to protect everyone involved when it comes to a standard. We're trying to cover manufacturers, installers, and consumers with these standards. So, you know, really trying to think through the process of who's affected takes time. So I think the amount of work that's happened over the last year is substantial, and I think we're really looking forward to see this progress forward.
Yeah, I don't mean to make this a love fest, but there's a person that hasn't gotten much cred so far, and that's Scott Carothers. He's done what Scott does, which is quietly do the work and try to do his best, you know, when he's asked. I know he spent lots of time putting stuff together, and it's been a process. There's lots of folks involved, many on this phone call. Becky and Scott especially, I need to, you know, say thank you, because, and you know, Mark Heinlein, you're familiar with what it took when you and Brad and a few other folks, I think Todd was part of your group 2 or 3 years ago. You know how much time you spent to try to make a real effective 10802. Chip O'Rear made a comment earlier that 11812 took 10 years just to find some kind of collaboration. So, yeah, it's a process. It seems silly, but there's a whole different, what I call method speak, that you have to get through, because you can't, it's not conversational. But hopefully we're doing our best to try to make it as precise as possible and provide clarity.
That's right, Chris. The group I was part of, I know we did our best work at 3 a.m. Scott Carothers, tell us a little bit about your role that Chris mentioned. What have you been up to on this?
That's a very interesting piece, Mark, and thank you. And thank you, Chris, for the accolade, but this is a team effort. We're all doing what we need to do to get this thing done. But we looked at the ANSI document, and as Chris alluded to earlier, I've used this document for years, and I go back to the point where, and I'm sure Chris does as well, when it was the gray book and it was the AN numbers, and it was probably the most complicated document you ever wanted to read. And our goal was really to make this more user-friendly. As we looked at this together, even before the whole committee went through, was Chris, Becky, and myself looking at it and saying, okay, this document is such a jumble of standards. Where can we make this thing more user-friendly? So early on, we made the decision that we would make 10801 the work by others, with a few other things in preparation. And we would make 108.02 all the work of the installer. So you didn't have to leaf between the two documents or the two sections of the document to find what particular aspect you thought was important for that installation technique. So now, when we're done, hopefully with the blessing of the full committee of 65 or so people, we will have a document that installers can go to 108.02, and that'll be the listing of all the installation method standards that are a part of installation. The rest of it will be the work that is performed by other contractors or other trades, getting it ready for us.
Somebody made a comment to me this morning, young lady that works here, Cynthia Dixby, a little frustrated with the document. She said, well, it could be one page. The whole thing could just say, see manufacturer's installation recommendations. Okay. You know, there's an element of truth to that because most people who are not regularly involved with the document don't understand that this is a recommendation and that among all of the other documents or pieces of paper that come out, it's the local building code that absolutely takes precedence. And then following that, it's the installation or the manufacturer's installation recommendations until you get to court. So, you know, this is a recommendation, but there are lots of other, but there's a reason that this is, again, the foundation, because, geez, there's just too many other things that you couldn't possibly fit into one document, and those need to be addressed by the various associations. Like there's associations with items from IAPMO, there's ASTM standards in there. There's things that are exclusive to TCNA. There's things that are exclusive to individual manufacturers and proprietary products. So, you know, why can't it be just one page? Well, because again, we're trying to build a foundation, and the foundation doesn't care what you build on it. The foundation just tells you what you need to be able to support whatever you want to put on top of it.
So, Chris, you mentioned something that picked my ears, and that's it all works until you get to court. What changes when you get to court?
Well, that's when the nitpicky word game comes about. So I have never been personally involved in a failure that rose to the level of a lawsuit, so I can't really speak to that. You know, honestly, I want to turn that question over to the person who's probably most capable of answering that, who's hopefully still on the call, and that's Dave Govas. Is Dave still on?
I see Dave there. Dave, are you able to unmute and talk a little bit about what might happen if you haven't followed the ANSI standards or aren't familiar with them and you end up in court?
You lose.
Thanks, Dave.
I've been in court on numerous occasions where ANSI documents have been brought to the table normally by me, and I've never seen them lose in court ever. Yeah, it's a complicated web, but yeah, people go out of business because of ANSI documents. Those who have never read them, seen them, get involved in a project, decide that they're their own engineering marvels, you're toast. I actually have one just started yesterday in Chris's backyard that I was going to call him about.
What's good that I don't know about it, because that means I'm not involved. So,
and Mark, if I can speak to that a little bit, you know what we're not necessarily trying to keep people out of court with these documents. What we're really trying to do with any standard really is develop something that can ultimately be successful. I think everyone on this call all benefits from successful tile installations. And so what we're trying to do with these documents is provide the base amount of information that can lead to a successful installation. And of course, if it's successful, then you probably don't end up calling Dave and having to pay him a whole bunch of money too. But, you know, you get to stay out of court, but mostly you just get to do a good installation. And that's really what we're doing with ANSI. It's what we do with the handbook. It's all about providing the people that need the information the most what they need to be successful.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Thank you, Dave. That was very clear.
I have one comment to that, Ryan. I think you can be overly idealistic about this. You know, it's not, you know, in this latest one that just came up the other day, you know, they took it to the outer limit of acceptability And we can't be idealistic about this. That's, I guess, my overall statement. We have to be realistic.
I think I 100% agree with you, Dave. You know, the standard is not meant to cover 100% of everything every time. It's meant to give you some guidance and some guidelines. And you know, I think anyone that knows if you're trying to tread the limits, there's always a possibility that you fall over the line. But it at least gives you some guidance and some starting points, which I think is always helpful for anyone in a situation like that.
I want to bring in a comment that Bart Bettiga gave us in the chat screen that I think is pertinent to the conversation. He says that 75% of tile installed in the USA is imported, and most often or many times there are no installation recommendations, or they are written for other countries' methods. We in the US need ANSI to provide guidance to both specifiers and contractors. Would you agree with that statement of Bart's? Ryan?
Yes, I would. I completely agree. We do need ANSI standards because, you know, in Chris's case where he had someone suggest just follow the manufacturer's recommendations, there are instances where manufacturers may not have recommendations. You need something to point to. And there are instances where manufacturer recommendations are based on the standards that are available. So without these standards, manufacturers may not have harmonized recommendations, or they may not have any recommendations at all. So it's, you know, definitely a good resource to have.
If I may,
Dave?
I think our standards need to be based on our methods of construction, because what I see with imported tile, and I've worked with companies that import tile, and in one particular instance I'm thinking of quite vividly, they were wondering, they're a vendor to the big boxes, and they couldn't understand why they were getting all these claims, and they actually sent some people over, and we put them through a little course and everything, and they had no idea of the type of construction that we use in the US because it's not a methodology that they used in their own country. And I think that's the biggest thing. If any quality piece of tile will survive if installed in an American structure using American methods, I guess is my point. Other countries don't publish these methods, and a lot of these countries have different types of construction, primarily masonry construction, where they're not exposed to all the elements that we are.
Yeah, they don't know what a piece of gyprock is or a gypboard is. I mean, they don't understand that. I had the opportunity to go to Europe and talk with a manufacturer. This is before GPTP even had a name. This is way back in the process when we were considering putting together a standard for gauge porcelain tile. And one of the manufacturers brought us through their little thing, and they had a little demo, and the guy troweled the material down and he slapped it in place, and he was fini. And we said, okay, well, now take it back up. And he was all confused. Well, why would I do that? So, well, because in Europe, if there's a crack in the tile, they just keep going, move along. You know, it's nothing to see here. But when he pulled it up, he had entire sections of the panel that wasn't supported, at least not in American standards. And I drew my finger on this thin set around in the circle. I said, "You see this? You know what we call this in America?" And he's still all confused. I said, "We call this a lawsuit." Okay, because that's the reality that we deal with. And like Dave said, it's masonry over there. It's in 400, 200, 700-year-old stone and cement wall that's been flattened to a degree that we just don't get in the fast-paced American construction that we're all dealing with today. So it's a very different standard. And let me just give kudos to TCNA and NTCA when we were there on a different occasion dealing with what was the International Tile basically the tile guys group. A guy from Germany, guy, Eastern Bloc guys. Anyway, they were stunned at the level of detail that we had in our documents. It was inconceivable to them that there was this much information. And I'm really referring to all the documents, ANSI and NTCA, and in fact the NTCA document as well. So it's partly driven by our culture. It's partly driven by this cheaper, faster, construction environment that we have here. The design build best price is the best job. We all know that that's not true. So the ANSI standard really is there to protect the consumer, because if something does go wrong, as Dave said, if you didn't follow the standard, you're going to lose. Because truthfully, the standard is the foundation by which successful tile installations are built. It's just really that simple.
That is a tremendous discussion. Very, very valuable information and background of why we have these standards and why you're going through this process. And I want to bring Scott Conwell back in a little bit and talk about some of that detail that you just described, Chris. Scott, you sent me a document that shows some of that detail. Would you care to share that with our attendees?
Sure. Do you want to put it on the screen and I can just speak to what it is?
Yeah, tell us what this is, Scott, and why we're looking at this, and how all this pertains to this process we've been talking about the ANSI review.
Sure. Well, when we started going through page 1 of A108.01 and saw the word substrate, and then read a little bit further into the standard and saw the same part of the assembly being referred to not as a substrate, but a sub-assembly, and then seeing it referred to a few pages later as a backing, and then a backing material, and then a backing assembly. And we were all scratching our heads like, there's 5 different words for the same thing here. And then somebody said, well, are we sure it's the same thing? And that was unclear, so we debated that. So what we finally did, and again, this is all just, in the proposal stage, but we wanted to eliminate all of the redundant and unnecessary words. If there's one thing, let's call it what it is, and keep it, only identify it one way, just for the sake of being consistent and uniform. So what you're looking at on the screen is our best attempt at, is it a wall? Is it a floor? Is it a soffit? And the answer is yes. All right, so this is an intentionally very general depiction of a tile let me back up, of an assembly. So you see on the left, the assembly is made up of top part and a bottom part. That's not a technical term, part, that's my term. But an assembly is that, it's a construction of a wall or a floor. And we're going to draw that red line, and it may be a little arbitrary, and we could say, well, I'm the tile contractor, but I also install cement board when I'm on a residential job. But when I'm on a commercial job, it's the carpentry trade that installs cement board. And that's kind of out of the scope of this discussion. But what we're trying to accomplish with this diagram, Mark, and the rest of you, is we're trying to simplify the assembly, and we're trying to introduce a set of terminology that can be broadly applied and to the components in the assembly, whether it's a wall or a floor. So what that red line is anything below the red line is, generally speaking, work done by others. That uppermost layer is of the backing assembly is the substrate. The substrate doesn't move, because we had that discussion too. Some of the people on the call, and probably maybe many of you, and maybe most of you, think that the substrate is anything that's immediately under the tile. So is the membrane a substrate? Is the self-leveler a substrate? And there's varying ideas of where the substrate is, and does the position of the substrate move when the assembly, as the assembly is constructed. And we just thought, no, let's define what the substrate is as as the uppermost layer of the backing assembly, which is where our work begins. Our work being the tile assembly. So that little section that says tile assembly, that is generally the work of the tile contractor. And so quite simply, this is what we're trying to do, is just introduce a set of terms that we can agree on and stick to and apply across all the standards.
Well, a picture speaks loudly to understand that, and what a terrific explanation. Does our panel, is this something that we're going to be seeing in the ANSI standards? Will we see a diagram like this?
We haven't really talked about that, I don't think, have we?
That remains to be seen. I'm gonna guess and say that, yeah, I think this will find its way in someplace because there's no reason not to have it. I could say that I don't think the version that you're looking at is the final version, just based on some of the feedback I'm getting. But you know, most important, at least from my perspective, this particular illustration is, and again, mine's just one opinion. You know, I keep fighting for the tile person shows up. Okay, I don't want to tell the concrete contractor where to put his rebar. I don't want to tell the carpenter where his stuff. I simply know that I'm responsible for building a successful assembly on top of the structure. The structure is whatever the structure is. I'm responsible from that, the face of that structure up. So we spent years debating L over 360 and 240 and 720 per stone, and you know, I don't know how many tile guys I can't go into a place and say, well, this structure is not suitable for a tile assembly because there's too much deflection. I'm not an engineer. I simply want to be able to focus on my tile assembly. So yeah, to Scott Conwell's point, cleaning that up and having a starting place, while that seems maybe overly simplistic, is kind of a big step, because as you mentioned before, it's really been fairly undefined, and people defined it to their pleasure or whatever suited the purpose at the time.
Well, and I think too, Chris, you know, to build on that, you mentioned earlier, some of these standards go back maybe 60 years. And over that time frame, certain portions have been revised or added to. And each time that happens, you're using language and terms that might be common at that time frame or during that time. So, you know, this effort really is to help harmonize all of that across these standards, so that the language that was there 60 years might still be relevant, but let's at least bring the terminology or bring in the specifications and what's expected of the tile contractor and other trades all together.
Yeah, well said. Mark, you're muted.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I've heard a lot of words here that we on the NTCA's technical team hear frequently. You know, deflection is one of them. How do you measure deflection? 360, 720. How do I figure that out? We're not engineers. We're the tile contractor and tile installers, but I can see where there's a lot of debate. If I'm the contractor and I need to, maybe I'm a residential remodeling contractor, I'm working on a 100-year-old structure, you know, I need to somehow recognize that that floor can support my assembly. Is that part of this discussion?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right.
Well, it's part of the discussion in that we want to eliminate as contractors taking responsibility for work by others, and I think much of our conversation during these review calls is how can we draw that line between work of the tile contractor and work by others, and you know, by ignoring it, that's not what we should do. But we're trying to kind of, I think, delineate where others' work ends and where our work starts. Otherwise, we get that scope creep.
I think this is going to be a very valuable thing for the future generations of tile contractors and installers and all tile experts in every respect.
You're going to bless us or curse us one way or the other. Hey, I want to shout out to Niall Wadford. He's the vice chairman of everything. He's the vice chairman of ANSI, and he's been, you know, he's been participating in these groups and you know, he's just one of those guys. that if you want a solid answer, you go to. But I also want to call him out now because he's also a consultant. So Dave answered the question a little bit. You know, what do you use the ANSI document for now when you're doing your consulting work?
Well, Chris, when we're doing consulting, I try to be unbiased, neither siding with the general contractor, architect, A&D community, or the tile installation professional. I'm using that term loosely sometimes because some of what we see is not properly installed material. But to be totally unbiased, we use the standards to judge everything or give an opinion on whether or not the installation meets the standard that was either specified or is an industry best practice. And if it fails, we aren't making the judgment. The standard is actually making the judgment. And whether it meets or exceeds, or whether or not the failure to meet that standard actually caused the failure. Because generally they don't call me out to write an opinion or a consulting report on jobs that are performing well. Generally, they're it's the last ditch effort to try to save, or to the last step before it goes to court, and they need some information on whether or not who to point the finger at. So the standards are good basis for judging an installation and whether or not it meets the criteria to make the installation perform.
Niall, we have a discussion in the chat room right now about insurance companies and whether ultimately an insurance company might just pay, or whether there will be some sort of settlement with or without the insurance company in court, or maybe even before court. What in your experience happens with that?
It's interesting you say that, Mark, because I had that same phone call yesterday, right before our ANSI call. I had an insurance agent actually call me on behalf of their client, who we had already contracted with to replace some defective work, or work that was considered to be a failure by the client and the general contractor, and the insurance was involved because they were subrogating back against the original tile contractor. And we were called in to my installation company was actually contracted, and I said, well, to offer an opinion like that, they asked me to write a letter of opinion of why the installation failed. And I said, I can give you an opinion of what we see from the surface, but to actually tell you why it failed and why the result on the top is occurring, we would have to do some destructive testing or forensic analysis, and that would occur during the actual installation. So a little bit of a unique position in that we're asked to write a consulting report as my installation company is actually performing the demolition. So insurance companies get involved in it from that aspect when they are trying to protect their clients. I've had that happen, and I've had one earlier about a month ago, similar situation where a construction consortium hired a local contractor and they didn't perform to spec, and I had them send me the specs, and they were collaborating with their insurance company to find out how to proceed. So sometimes it can be the start of a case, or sometimes it can be the last piece of the puzzle they need before they take the evidence to the person they're actually trying to get some money out of.
Well, it's an amazing process, Niall. Panel, does anyone have anything else to add before we move along to the next portion of our program?
If I might, I do want to thank Becky, who is the scribe for this process. She has been instrumental in keeping us out of many rabbit holes and herding cats, as they say. her calm professional manner and level of organization has been instrumental in the success of this so far. So thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Becky. You're receiving applause here. Panel, stay with us. Attendees, please stay with us. We are going to take a little break right now and go to our Ask the Ref game, which is based on the NTCA's reference manual. If you have questions for the panel, think of them now, and we will come back to our panel after the game and ask your questions then, and we'll get some final words of wisdom from them. Custom building products and Ruby tools, we couldn't function without you. Thank you very much for everything you do to support this program and many of our other programs. And before we return it back to the panel, I want to remind everyone that our next and upcoming programs in the month of May include on May 5th, we're going to discuss the Why Tile program with Kathy Meyer of the Tile Council of North America. Kathy will be our guest that day. On May 19th, we're going behind the scenes of the NTCA reference manual and the NTCA technical committee with none other than James Welfel. And on May 25th, we'll re-explore our artisan edition of the Roundtable programs. These artisan editions are on Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. We had one last night. It'll be up on our YouTube channel soon. If you can join us, you don't want to miss these. They are fabulous displays of tile proficiency and artistic excellence. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Randy. That was another terrific Ask the Ref program. Thanks, Custom Building Products and Ruby Tools. And going back to our panel, I'd like to ask you for any other words of wisdom that you might have for everyone in using the ANSI standards and the documents that guide us. Chris Walker, let's start with you.
I don't have any words of wisdom, but I do wonder, do we have questions out there? And my question would be, how many lines is Will White on this call? Because he's on the
four actually. He's gone from 3 to 4 now.
I'd like to try to see if there's any questions.
I don't have any questions in the chat room. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead and raise your hand, turn off your mic. This panel is yours to speak to.
While we're waiting for questions, I can just share a couple of observations. I think 10 years from now, when I look back at 2020 and 2021 and the pandemic, one of the memories that's going to come to mind is the biweekly and weekly calls. 3 hours. We did a good job of holding it down to 2 hours, but we started out at 3 hours every 2 weeks, and then we had some splinter groups. For a while I was on a call every week. So anyway, it was a focus. It's a good, the fact that nobody's traveling and we can get all the brain trust together, reliably. I mean, I'm shocked at how reliable this group is. Everybody shows up most of the time, and we are able to focus. And, and the last thing I'll say is, don't be alarmed. I mean, I know that you guys know the ANSI standards, all of you who are on this call, you use them, you know them, and now, oh no, somebody's monkeying with the standards. What does that mean? And I kind of want to put your nerves at ease. We're doing less substantive changes and more organizational changes, I think you'll find. I mean, I'm not saying we're not changing anything about the substance. There are a few improvements we're making, but for the most part, it is really just shuffling around information, making it easier to find and easier to look up primarily, and then updating it for the times. And I know that I said that was the last thing, but one other thing too is that it benefits to have different perspectives. Most of the committee are contractors as well. I think they should be. We have a few suppliers. I'm an architect, and I've actually, I've got another architect who's on the ANSI committee, Barbara Larson with Master Spec. I've been kind of having some offline discussions with her, and she does not even live in the tile world. And I'm a stepson into the, adopted son into the tile world. I didn't cut my teeth on this like you guys did, but I think that's good to have kind of outsiders looking at the standard from that perspective, because what you know and understand an outsider may not as readily pick up. So I think we've been able to benefit from all those things.
Scott, thank you. Chip O'Riordan.
Yes, thank you, Mark. I'm wondering when the ANSI committee or perhaps a Tile Council subcommittee or MMSA is going to form a subcommittee to look into developing standards for elevator cab floors. As an architectural rep, I'm posed with that question monthly. And I've spoken to Schindler, Dover, Otis, ThyssenKrupp. I've found experts in construction at all of those companies who would be willing to participate in a subcommittee. The Tile Council Handbook's 470 pages, and the word elevator doesn't appear in there. And I'm wondering when a subcommittee might be adopted to begin to address that.
Ryan?
So, Mark, yeah, I think I can answer that. So in terms of development of new handbook details, that can sort of happen at any time. I mean, new submissions can be made to the handbook sort of at any point, and you can reach out to me or to Caitlin Simpson at Tile Council, and we can, you know, if you're trying to base it on an existing detail, or if you're trying to, you know, just develop a brand new detail, you know, typically we just look for something that meets the same format of existing details. If what you're looking to do is develop a subcommittee, again, sort of you can start that now and reach out to some people that you feel would be useful to that kind of group, and it would provide you good input. Or it can be brought up as new business at the next handbook committee meeting, which would be in conjunction with Total Solutions later this year.
I'll follow up with our association.
Hey,
Thanks,
Chip, I
Ryan.
can answer that question too. There is no elevator floor that meets the ANSI standard for deflection. So, you know, it's pretty simple for us. We just tell folks whether it's specified or not, we install with epoxy. We put a subfloor in no matter what that is. And, you know, we put an indestructible floor, what essentially is a bullet in terms of, you know, compared to tile floors. They're not supposed to move at all, right? And this thing's moving all day long. So, yeah, it's a bad situation. It'd be hard to put that together as a standard because there's no single point of reference that you could say as the foundation for a successful elevator installation. You can't point to it. You can only do your best. I do want to ask a question of Brad Denny, if he's got a second, if you don't mind.
Well, while Brad is unmuting, I want to mention to Chip that Scott Conwell sent you a message in the chat screen there, Chip.
Brad, you participated a little bit a few years ago in this process. Tell me, what do you see as any fundamental differences between this go round and the last go round?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that the small committee that Mark and Todd and I were on had not really made any submissions for changes to ANSI. We had an idea of what we kind of wanted to do and what we wanted to address, and we tried to work around some parameters of what we felt would be the right way. But this committee, having experience, has it seems like we're thinking a lot about a lot of things further down the road than maybe what our committee had just from the sheer experience that everybody has had on ANSI. And so that's been a helpful. It's been really helpful in the process, which is good because our submission didn't go very far. And I hope that what we've put together here so far will be successful.
Becky.
I have a question for Ryan to answer for this group. If somebody wants to get involved with ANSI, what should they do? How do they go about getting more involved?
So that's a great question, Becky. So all of the ANSI meetings are open to guests. Our next ANSI meeting will be held in conjunction with coverings. It'll be on July 6th. you can get more information about upcoming meetings and the ANSI committee overall on our website, tcnatile.com. If you're wanting to get more involved, again, working in the ad hoc groups or the small committees, like have been working to develop these revisions to 108.01 and 108.02, you don't have to be a member of the committee to be a participant in those efforts either. So, you know, we're always looking for input, and feel free to share that with us. You know, we might send it back to you and say, hey, this idea sounds great, but it, you know, it has to be developed into an actual submission. But you know, we can always help to sort of point to the right direction on different people that might be able to assist with that as well.
If I could piggyback off of that, so as I look around the room, I'm relatively one of the newer participants. I feel like I hate to say younger because my beard betrays me, but nonetheless, that's exactly what I did. I just started showing up to meetings and sitting in the back of the room for several years at meetings, and just watching, learning, seeing the process, and then I mean, when you show up and you get noticed that you're putting effort in to learn that process, and it gives you an opportunity to eventually be a working part of the process. So yeah, anybody that's interested in how this all goes down, make an effort to at least attend a meeting at some point in time and see how it works.
Yeah, following that up, that's exactly how I started too. Just listening for a few years and participating.
So, Dave Goetz.
I just wanted to expand on that. Excuse me. And make sure everybody knows they're welcome to participate in these meetings and in the development of these standards. You know, you don't have to be a committee person or a voting member to participate. Everybody's welcome to participate. And participation is what we need, especially from those who are going to have to live by the things that we develop. I mean, we look for participation. We want participation. We don't all want to be just sitting here. This isn't the good old boys club. This is the everybody's invited club.
Excellent point. Niall Wadford.
Mark, I'd just like to encourage everybody on the call, or possibly tile contractors or design professionals that aren't on these committees, that aren't familiar with this work, to look at the ANSI standards and the ANSI book as a tool, much like any other tool you would use on the job. It can be very relevant for what you're doing, be very relevant for how you do it and how others are supposed to leave the structure that we're supposed to be installing tile over. So not only it's not as threatening a document as it was when I first looked at it. I didn't really understand it, and now that I'm involved in the standards process, it makes much more sense to me, and we are in a diligent effort at present to make that much more relevant to you, much easier to understand, and much more pertinent to what you do every day. So if you don't have a copy, get one and use it as a tool. Read through it. If you have any questions, anybody on the committee will be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Niall. Scott Carothers, anything to add before we close our program?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for this opportunity of this platform with the Roundtable. All I would say to the folks that are listening today and those that will be a part of the final review, the larger committee of ANSI, is to be patient. We are diligently trying to give us a readable document that is going to be viable for all aspects of the industry, whether it be the design community or whether it's the installer or the specifier. So with that patience, I would ask for us to look at that and not a knee jerk, as Scott Conwell alluded earlier. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Give it a chance. We've put a lot of time and effort in this process and this project to make it a very viable and readable document. And as Scott said, my favorite piece isn't in there. Where'd it go? Well, nothing has left. We're just reorganizing it and making it something that's going to be more viable for all concerned. So just be patient and don't give us a knee jerk. Give it some time.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to walk on.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Walk on the end of it. No, I appreciate that. But I do want to ask, for example, there's some folks here that I don't know, like Katie, I guess it's Marcotte. Katie, hi, Katie. So why are you here and what did you hope to learn today? And did you get any questions answered that you might have had? You're muted.
There we go. Try to unmute myself. I just figured I would show my face and see what it was all about. I've meant to make the last 3 or 4 just busy with work during the workday. So.
Okay. Well, welcome. Don't drive off.
I'm not driving.
Okay. So the next thing I've got to do is I've got to get back on another call with Scott Conwell at 3:30 for another one of these meetings to go through the terms. But, you know, I appreciate that. John, did you, other than winning all the stuff, what did you learn today? Anything? Did you have any questions? Did you disconnect in any way with, you know, why you spent the time?
Just continued education, trying to stay up to date with everything, you know. So yes, I continue. Yes, I learned something today.
Okay, cool, cool.
Yes, sir.
Well, if you're ever at coverings or surfaces or TSP or any of that, please look us up. Like Dave said, you know, we really, really, really want to engage new faces, new voices, new perspectives. You know, Nicholas is out there working hard, trying to get some tile up. You know, this is all for guys like him. I've been standing where he's standing, although I was faster than he was. But but yeah, this is what we're here for. We're here for the tile contractor. That's the NTCA's main charge, is training.
Everybody's faster than he was. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Nicholas. I'm just breaking your shoes.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. I got you.
Thank you.
You have a good one.
Nicholas can take it and give it, Chris.
Is that right?
Go Dogs. All that roll tide business. Go Dogs.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. We appreciate your time. This is important stuff, and we're doing it for you, and hopefully it has some meaning, you know, at some point in your business. So.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank our esteemed panel, and I mean that. You guys are esteemed. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your time. Scott Carothers, Ryan Marino, Becky Serban, Chris Walker, Scott Conwell. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be here today and all of the information you've provided. To our attendees and our audience, thank you for contributing and for being here. And remember to join us on May 5th, when we will have TCNA's Kathy Meyer here talking about the Y-Tile program. It's going to be fascinating. It's a great program. Stay tuned, stay well, be safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Thanks.